Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree, your family tree. Check your genealogy, find who was who and how who came to be. On your family, 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 family tree.
Welcome, listeners. It's time for the Genealogy radio show, the show that's keeping you in the loop. And today's show is all about Limerick surnames, origins and migrations. And there are an amount of them, and they're wonderful surnames to look at. And we were very lucky to have on air a guest today, Tony Brown. So welcome, Tony, to the show today.
How are you doing, Anna?
Very well indeed. And thank you very much for agreeing to talk about some Limerick surnames with us.
Okay.
And Tony, can you tell us a little bit about what makes Limerick surnames special?
Well, Limerick being, I suppose, really the capital of the Midwest, a lot of Limerick names have died out, unfortunately, over the years and have been mixed with a lot of names coming from Clare, Tipperary, North Kerry, North Cork, coming into the city, and it's kind of mixed it up. And so many names have disappeared over the years. It's amazing how quickly a surname can disappear, you know.
Yes.
Supposing a man has 3 daughters, and the 3 daughters get married, their names automatically will change, unless they have the old English system of these two, which I oppose, 2 surnames coming together. That to me is only part of snobbery. But anyway, the name could die out in one generation. It's amazing, really.
It can die out in one generation, and surname extinction as well is possible, that surnames die out altogether, not just in one particular family, but altogether. So another thing that I'm going to be talking about later on in the show is surname variant, because it's coming up quite a lot for a lot of the research I'm doing, and it's something that people listening to the show need to be aware of, that variant is a very common thing. And I have a wonderful list in front of me that I downloaded from Limerick Genealogy, Listen Alta House, Doyle, County Limerick, and it's the top 100 surnames in 19th century Limerick, which is a very useful one indeed. So we have the Ryans, top of the list there, and many people would associate, that are ignorant of Limerick, would associate Ryans to be predominant with Tipperary, but that's not the case at all. They are very, very common in Limerick. God. The and top name.
Don't tell me that the first name is John. When you
Yes.
say John Ryan, oh God, I say, you know, because
Exactly.
there are so many John or Sean Ryans. Even one of the best sources, I think, when I go to schools talking about names, I tell the children to get out the phone book, and they look at me like, the phone book, you know, and I say, you'll see where a name roughly comes from. You know, if you look at the phone book, you'll get a cluster of names in a particular area, especially if it's unusual.
That and graveyards.
Yeah.
That's where you'll get them.
No, you will.
And O'Brien, the second name. Now, people may not be aware, but the Clare name, O'Brien, the O'Briens were originally around Limerick anyway. They were ousted out of Limerick.
A lot of people in Clare might argue that, but you
I know, they were ousted. And they made their homes in Clare a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
So the O'Briens have a huge sway there.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
And the Fitzgeralds then come third on the list.
Yeah.
So that, again, is Fitzgerald, though, would be a newcomer into Ireland with the Anglo-Normans.
Yeah, you see, it's like people constantly say, what is an Irish name? There was an old story years ago, it was often told that the Macs and the O's, that if you'd Mac and O, but then what does that leave the Scottish names? You know, with all the Macs you have in Scotland.
Exactly.
You know, that you could be out until the cows come home as regards what is an Irish surname. Like, I'm Brown. Brown was an E. Now, the E to me signifies Catholic from Church of Ireland. Church of Ireland normally don't use the E in Brown. They spell it as the colour, Brown.
E.
Whereas I use the E.
And are you the Limerick origin of Brown?
Well, I think so. There's a lot of Browns in Limerick, especially out in West Limerick now. There are a fair amount of Browns, as in the television man Vincent Brown. He's from Broadford in County Limerick, and there are a lot of Browns around that area in Broadford. It's a lot of them, but there are a fair amount of them in the city as well. And how they came, I mean, really, they're also the Browns are one of the tribes of Galway, one of the 14 tribes of Galway.
Well, I come across a lot of Browns in Kilmallock in County Limerick as well.
Yeah.
And just for our listeners, Vincent Brown does a famous political show on TV3, and a very good political analysis. So
he uses the E now as well in his name, being Catholic as well, you see.
Okay, so then the Protestant Browns, do they not?
No, they don't. And there's nothing stopping them from doing it, of course, or vice versa. But generally speaking, as a kind of a rule of thumb, that if you get a Brown without an E, it's usually Church of Ireland.
Okay.
There's so many, it's like Kavanagh with a K or with a C. There are oodles of names out there that distinguish Church of Ireland names from Catholic names. A lot of it has got to do, as you know yourself, Lana, from proselytising.
Yeah.
When the thing to do was to drop the Mac or the O.
But also, I have to say that variance and spelling and our hang-up on spelling is not there in the 19th century.
No.
I've come across a piece of research the other day where I was doing Maloney research, and Maloney was spelt Molony on the 1901 census, and it was Maloney on the 1911 census, the very same family. So if you're looking at the census and you start searching, you need to take into account that the surname spelling could be different even between censuses for the very same family.
But a lot of it has got to do, I believe now, in snobbery. People trying to be different, Like the Maloney's of Kilcannon over near Tulla, they were Molony. They didn't use the E in it.
Well, it was believed that, again, if you didn't use the E, you were the Protestant Maloney's. But I've come across Maloney's with not using the E, and they are Catholic. And we can see that in the parish registers as well.
That to me, and especially nowadays, is snobbery. People trying to be different in spelling their names and putting in, leaving out someone like Kirby, Kirby, or is it Kerby? To me it should be Ki.
But sometimes it's the hangover, Tony, from the Gaelic to the English-speaking world and the sound and people writing by sound, and literacy not being as important as numeracy, especially in the 18th and early 19th century.
Yes.
So there is a factor of that, and I'll be talking about that at that talk that you've invited me to do for the Limerick Historical Society on Monday in Mary I. Yeah. So I just need to announce that, and I'll be taping that, so we'll get that out to listeners as well. Now, my fourth name on the list is Connors, without the O, or without so on. So do you know Connors?
Connors, there are certain names now, again, with traveller names. There are traveller names you get. Names like Cawley, Connors, Ward, in County Limerick, names like Quilligan and Sheridan. They're names now I associate with travellers who have kind of intermarried, and the names kind of stay. If the O is gone, to me, you never really get anybody without the O. It's usually O'Connor.
It comes back in the early 20th century. It is gone before then. Yeah. I see that it comes back with the Gaelic revival and so on. And my fifth name, Hayes.
Yeah, Hayes is very common in Limerick now. An awful lot of Hayes families now. But to me, Hayes would be an English name. Could have been brought in by somebody from England. Because in Limerick you had a lot of Limerick being a garrison town, don't forget, you had a lot of English soldiers who come in and gave a lot of names in Limerick that I know have come from British Army men that had been stationed here in Limerick, had married, and then had children, 6 or 8 sons even at that.
With Hayes, I'd come across a very strong Gaelic variant of O'Hay and so on. So I would say that you could be looking at maybe a difference there, you know. But Walsh, number 6, Brannock, very strong name, and I would associate that with an introduction in the 13th century.
But again,
into
that's
Ireland.
another name now. That is it Walsh or
Yes.
Walshe? Is there an E in it?
No E.
You see, so you get so many. When you look, it's very difficult when you're looking up somebody's name, Walsh now, for example, in a phone book. If you're looking up, supposing he's in a name like John Walsh, which I presume, I know there are oodles of them, you check up a John Walsh in the phone book, and you're looking through, has he the E or not? And it could take you half an hour to find the name. You know, if he has the name Walsh, or spelled with an E or without an E, we don't know.
Now, a very old name here, Ahern.
Oh, Ahern is very common. Very common out in West Limerick now. And again, the spelling of Ahern, Ahern, Ahrene,
Yeah.
Hearne. Oh, God, there's so many
There is a
spellings.
lot of variants of that. And a great site for surname variants, listeners, is John Grenham's site.
Yeah, John Grenham, yeah.
It used to be Irish Times Ancestor, but it's moved over to Irish Ancestry. Now, there is a subscription for it, but it's well worth it. And it's www.johngrenham.com. And John Grenham is a very famous writer on Irish genealogy and so on. And it's an excellent primer text for anyone looking for their Irish roots and so on. So www.john, John, Grenham, Grenham.com is an excellent site for surnames, being able to match 2 surnames in one area, place names, locations and so on. So I look at Limerick in the 14th century, and I look at how it became English town and Irish town, and how it developed into a strong merchant town. And that, of course, must have influenced surnames as well.
It did hugely. Although lots of the names now from the old merchants have gone out of the city. Names like, comes to mind, a name like Nihill,
Yeah.
for example, was very common.
White.
And there's so many names have just disappeared. Names like Green. And who did it come in with? Who did these families come in with? I mean, you Dutch settlers coming into Limerick who brought in names like Vandeleur
Yeah.
in Clare. And in Limerick you had Vereker. And again, it became fairly common. And then you get into trouble if you get somebody with the name of a landed family. How did they acquire the name? You'd often wonder, you know.
Yes.
How they acquired the name of a landed family. Supposing you get a name like Studdard in Clare, somewhere in obscurity in Clare, where did they get the name? You can only guess as to how they got the name.
Exactly. And we have Burkes, a very strong Burke influence in Limerick. The Burkes, the de Burghs were in Limerick before they were up in Galway.
Yeah.
And they were given 2 disparate estates or parts of lands because that time the king would not want them to have lands beside each other because it would make them too powerful a force to be reckoned with in the 13th century. So they would give land they would divide up their parcels and they would sway the corridor through Clare to get up to their lands. And that's a very significant thing that Burke connection is very strong.
How do you spell your Burke? Is it B-U-R-K? Is it B-U-R-K?
Well, that's an English spelling, but I would be looking.
B-O-U-R-K-E?
I'd be looking at a different one for that.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
I wouldn't get hung up on the spelling.
Yeah, but still, that people insist. And how do you tell somebody when you come across a name that you know that they're actually spelling it incorrectly now, and they don't want to know? They persuade you that they're right.
Well, it is their name, you see, so it's a kind of thing that you have to...
Very difficult.
Very difficult indeed.
Very difficult, you know, when you tell them that the name has always been spelled up to your father's time as one way, and they say, oh, my father spelled it that way, you know. And why? But as I said at the beginning, an awful lot of it has got to do with snobbery. People trying to be different in spelling their name. It's like the O's, dropping of the O and dropping of Max. You know, should it be allowed? Like, is it Donovan or O'Donovan? You know,
Yes.
is it? There's so many out there, so many names that should the O be used?
Now, one of the things when I had a post up about this Limerick Surnames talk that I'm doing for you, and I had collated the names together, was that did I have McGrath's? And I don't think I had McGrath's on my list. But McGrath is 32 in the top 100, so a very significant player. And we've got Hanley, Grady, Mulcahy, Scanlon, Keefe, Daly, Gleeson, Keane, Mahoney, Kiley, Condon, Fitzgibbon, Griffin, Quinn, Shea, Sheehy, Dillon, Gorman, Hennessy, Hartnett, Conway, Hannon, Healy, Noonan, Leahy, Callaghan, Donoghue, Costello, Horrigans, Careys, Reedys, Morrisseys, Clearys, Clancy's, Curtin, Holleran, Nolan, Heffernan, Frawleys. And we have a lot of Frawleys, of course, around Clare as well.
Now, there's certain names even there now that you mentioned. Take a name like Hartnett, for example. If I met somebody in Limerick even today or tomorrow with the name Hartnett, I would automatically say, are you people from Abbeyfield?
Yes.
And the chances are they'd say yes. How did you know? It's like in County Limerick, out in Rathkeil, for example, you had the Palatines who came in 1709. They came to Ireland, the Palatines, from the Palatinate in Germany. And you get certain names you'll only find in Rathkeil. Names like Shire, Teskey. There's so many of them out there, Bovenizer. And they're all of German extract, you know, Schmidt.
Yes.
SMYTH as opposed to SMITH. And they're of German origin that are still outside in Rathkeil to this day. Ruttle, there's so many of them out there that are Palatine names.
Yes.
And in the city itself, being really a seafaring city, you still have an area in Limerick called, pronounced as the Wine Mill. It's really the Windmill, but pronounced locally as the Wine Mill. In the Wine Mill, you got sailors who come in and married.
Yes.
And to this day, you'll get names out there like Henniger, Getlevog, Olsen, Stanners. They're names that I'm very familiar with, and they all have originated in the Windmill area of Limerick.
That's
and these families
fascinating.
have went out now there. If you look up the phone book and you get a name like Getlevog, Getlevog, in the phone book there are about 4 entries, I think, for Getlevog. And they are all related. They are brothers, you know, that have ended up in the phone book, but they're really the one family. You know, it's a very unusual name, but it gets back. Gallagher is another name that was common in the Wine Mill. Like Gallagher, to me, is a Donegal name.
Yes.
And how did it get to Limerick?
Well, that's one of the things that migrations, names, is Limerick became a very significant industrial centre in the 19th century. It was a robust, and it had been a very robust centre of trade. Parliaments were held in Limerick centuries previous, and Limerick is a riverside city with the river Shannon flowing through it. A vibrant city, and it's it's got wonderful universities and all these kind of things. One of the notable features of Limerick City is King John's Castle, constructed in the year 1210, and that dominated the city. It was built by the Normans, and the castle now is open for visitors. It has a visitor centre and wonderful information and images of the city and so on. We also have famous sons, Frank Mccourt. Angela's Ashes was made into a successful movie, but the Mccourt, that name came from Northern Ireland.
That's
because
the name now again, that's coming down from 6 counties.
Because his father came from Northern Ireland.
Yeah, it's amazing the way names travel. Years ago, when I was a child growing up, I'm sure people out there listening would agree that if you got an unusual name in a small village or a town, it was usually a school teacher or a guard that brought it. Brought an unusual name to it, because they were the only people that really travelled, were school teachers and guards.
And they had to travel. They wouldn't be allowed to be posted in their local areas.
No, so that you got an unusual name, and you found out that the local guard was from Mayo, or he was from, and the same with the school teacher. The school teacher would originally have come from, he could have come from Cork, he could have come from Wexford, and he would have brought an unusual name into the area, which nobody had heard of. I'm amazed even that I often hear the odd name now coming up in Limerick, which I did only about 2 weeks ago. Laundra, Laudra, Laundra. And I said, where did the name come from? And I was curious. And it turned out that whether it's real or not, it could be a village called Ballylanders, Landerstown, Launders, out in County Limerick.
Well, that's very interesting, and all those kind of things are what make me fascinated with surnames and how they play out and what they mean. And I want just to make an announcement that Tony Brown, to give you your full title, will be part of our Clans and Surnames event in Nina, which is being held May the 15th to the 19th. And May will be or Tony will be given all this information and more on the specialities of surnames, because I know you know so much about this locale, and it's important that we connect with knowledge like that.
Oh, it is very important, because unfortunately it's kind of dying out, and I've noticed lately now with the reduction, people discarding landlines and the phones. There are less and less names going in out to the phone book, because the phone book is a fantastic source.
It will become a historical source at some stage.
Well, I'm lucky that I must have about 10 phone books going back to the 70s, and I kept some of them to see the differences in spellings, the difference in names, where they have moved into places, It's amazing the difference even in the past 20 years, with people moving so much nowadays, which didn't happen really up to the 60s. People really didn't move from their own area. They married locally, they lived locally, so the name never really moved out of what area they were in. Whereas now you can get a name any place now.
Exactly.
Like years ago you wouldn't get a McInerney in Donegal, and you wouldn't get a Brown down in Wexford. Whereas now they're travelling all around the place, everywhere.
Well, Tony, it's been wonderful to have you on the show today. We wrap up now, and thanks very much for your time. And the show will be podcast after, and we'll put it up. You can also tune in to rcb.ie. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, RCB Radio. So, Tony, thanks a million for...
very, very upmarket there with Facebook and all.
Yeah, Facebook and everything like that.
God.
Yeah. And we have to do that, Tony. We have to keep up with the times. And I look forward to meeting with you Monday night.
Yeah, okay, Laura.
Thank you, Tony. Bye.
Bye.
So, listeners, just to wrap up for today, and thank you, and we'll be podcast afterwards.
Did you ever stop and wonder if you could be related to everyone with your last name?
Just think, if you're a Lincoln, how you'd be congratulated if Honest Abe were someone you could claim.
To clear up any mystery, just check your family history.
Genealogy's the name of the game. Now some ancestors you'll find you want to hide,
but most of them will fill your heart with pride.
Oh, your family tree. Check your genealogy. Find who was who and how who came to be. On your family tree.